He invited his ex to humiliate her at his wedding, not knowing she'd become an omega, and arrived with 20 bodyguards who made even the millionaire guests bow their heads. The motorcade of black SUVs rolled to a stop outside the Grand Marquis Hotel. 20 men in tactical gear emerged first, their movements precise and professional as they established a perimeter around the entrance. Wedding guests froze mid-conversation, champagne glasses suspended in air, as they watched something that didn't belong at a society wedding. Then the rear door of the center vehicle opened, and Dominique Winters stepped out, sapphire gown, diamond jewelry that caught the afternoon light like captured stars, and a smile that said she knew exactly what was about to happen. Daniel Sterling's perfect day was about to become his worst nightmare. Before we go any further, if you love stories where power, secrets, and revenge collide in the most unexpected ways, please hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps this channel reach more people, and you won't want to miss what happens next. 8 years earlier, long before the black SUVs, before the sapphire gown, before Daniel Sterling's wedding day turned into a nightmare, Dominique Winters stood in front of a mirror and adjusted the straps of her burgundy dress for the third time. Not because it was crooked, because her stomach wouldn't stop telling her the truth. She didn't belong here. The crystal ballroom of the Meridian Grand glittered with old money and ruthless ambition. 300 of the city's most influential people gathered beneath chandeliers that looked like frozen lightning for the annual Metropolitan Charity Gala. Everywhere Dominique turned, she saw designer gowns, $1,000 suits, and smiles sharpened into weapons. Somewhere in this sea of privilege, Daniel was doing what he did best, networking, charming, owning the room like it was built for him. A year ago, she'd thought that confidence was beautiful. She'd met him in a coffee shop near the university, where she'd been finishing her graduate degree in international relations. He'd spilled his latte across her thesis notes, apologized like it was the end of the world, and somehow that disaster became dinner. Dinner became 6 months of late-night talks and laughter. 6 months became a key to his penthouse. Daniel Sterling, tech entrepreneur, millionaire by 30, with eyes that made her feel like she was the only person in any room. Except tonight. Tonight, those same eyes kept sliding past her and landing on the woman in the emerald dress. Victoria Ashford, daughter of the Ashford Hotel empire, blonde perfection wrapped in confidence, her laugh delicate and effortless, like wind chimes in a summer breeze. And every time Daniel leaned closer to her, every time he smiled too long, Dominique felt something inside her quietly fold in on itself, smaller, softer, easier to ignore. "You look beautiful," a voice said beside her. Dominique turned. Thomas Mark, one of Daniel's business partners, stood there with kind eyes behind expensive glasses, the rare type of man who didn't enjoy watching people squirm. "Don't let this crowd intimidate you," he added gently. "Most of them are just better at hiding their insecurities." Dominique tried to smile, but the air in the room suddenly changed like a storm rolling in without warning. The orchestra stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. People turned, whispered, watched. And there, near the main doors, Daniel stepped onto a small stage, a microphone in his hand. Dominique's heart lifted for a second, thinking this might be a surprise, something romantic, something that proved she still mattered. Then she saw his face. Not warm, not nervous, not in love. Cold, decided, final. And in that moment, Dominique understood something she wasn't ready to admit yet. Whatever Daniel was about to say wasn't going to change her life gently. It was going to rip it apart. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Daniel said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "And I want to be honest about something that's been on my mind for a while now." Dominique's heart began to hammer. This wasn't planned. This wasn't part of the evening's program. Around her, people were looking at her, then at Daniel, then back at her with expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed excitement at witnessing drama. "Dominique and I have been together for a year," Daniel continued, and the microphone amplified every word, made it inescapable. "And I've realized something important. I've realized that I need someone who matches my ambition, someone who understands the world I'm trying to build, someone extraordinary." He turned then, looked directly at her across the crowd, and Dominique felt the floor dropping away beneath her feet. "Dominique, you're a wonderful person, but you're ordinary, and I need someone who can keep up with where I'm going. I'm sorry, but this isn't working anymore." The silence that followed was crushing. 300 people holding their breath, phones already emerging to capture this moment, this public execution of her dignity. Dominique couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what was happening. Ordinary. He'd called her ordinary in front of everyone who mattered in this city. Then Daniel stepped down from the stage and walked directly to Victoria Ashford, took her hand, and kissed her in front of the entire ballroom. The message was unmistakable, clear, devastating. Dominique felt hands on her shoulders, Thomas trying to steady her, but she shook him off. She needed to get out, needed to escape before the tears that were burning behind her eyes betrayed her completely. She turned and ran, her heels clicking against marble, the sound of whispers and camera clicks following her like a wave. She made it to the parking garage before the sobs came, great heaving gasps that shook her entire body. Ordinary. She was ordinary, not good enough, not worth keeping, not worth anything at all. The video had been uploaded within an hour. By morning it had 500,000 views. By the end of the week, 3 million people had watched Daniel Sterling publicly dump his girlfriend at the Metropolitan Charity Gala. The comments were merciless. She really thought she could hold on to a millionaire looking like that. Imagine thinking you're in his league, the ordinary girl who aimed too high. That's what happens when you date out of your class. Dominique had stopped reading after the first 100 comments, but the damage was done. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, friends and former classmates calling with sympathy that felt more like curiosity, more like wanting to be close to the drama. She'd turned it off completely after the first day. Her apartment, the small studio she'd kept even after moving in with Daniel, felt like a cage now. 4 walls and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. She'd called in sick to her job at the international relations firm where she'd been working as a junior analyst. She couldn't face people. Couldn't face the pity or the judgment or the whispered conversations that would stop when she walked into her room. On the 7th day, Dominique stood in front of her bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Red eyes, hollow cheeks, defeat written across every feature. This was what ordinary looked like when it had been stripped of all pretense, all hope, all dignity. She'd been sleeping 16 hours a day, avoiding consciousness, avoiding the reality that her entire life had been humiliated in front of millions of strangers. Her friends had stopped calling. Her mother had called twice, but Dominique couldn't bring herself to answer, couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in her voice. "I told you he was too good to be true," her mother would say. "I told you to be careful." That night, Dominique sat on her bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, staring at her laptop where the video was paused on Daniel's face as he delivered the killing words. Ordinary. She'd replayed it dozens of times, torturing herself, trying to understand what she'd done wrong, how she'd failed to be enough. And then something shifted. Something dark and molten began to move in her chest, replacing the hollow ache with something harder, sharper, more dangerous. She wasn't sad anymore. She was furious. Dominique stood up, walked to her bathroom, and looked at herself in the mirror again. This time she didn't see defeat. She saw rage, pure, crystalline, focused rage. "Ordinary," she said to her reflection. Her voice was steady now, cold. "I'll show you what ordinary looks like." She wasn't going to cry anymore. She wasn't going to hide anymore. Daniel Sterling had made a calculation that night at the gala. He'd decided she wasn't worth keeping, wasn't worth his time or attention or respect. He'd thrown her away like something disposable. But what Daniel didn't understand, what he couldn't possibly know, was that humiliation is a forge, and she was about to be reborn in its fire. Dominique turned off her laptop, deleted her social media accounts, and began to plan. She didn't know exactly what she was planning for yet. She just knew that the woman who had run crying from that ballroom was dead, and whoever emerged from these ashes would make Daniel Sterling regret every word he'd ever said to her. 6 months later, Dominique was unrecognizable. She'd thrown herself into training with an obsession that bordered on madness. Krav Maga at 6 o'clock in the morning, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at noon, boxing in the evenings, weapons training on weekends. Her body had transformed from soft curves into something harder, leaner, more dangerous. But it wasn't just physical. She'd enrolled in every strategy course she could find: game theory, negotiation tactics, behavioral psychology. She devoured books on power, influence, manipulation. She was building herself into something new, something that Daniel wouldn't recognize. The gym she trained at was in the industrial district, far from the polished fitness centers where people like Daniel worked out with personal trainers and green smoothies. This place was raw, real, filled with fighters and soldiers and people who understood that the world wasn't kind to the weak. It was there, sparring with a former Army Ranger named Davidson, that everything changed. "You're good," a voice said from the edge of the mat, "but you're fighting angry. Anger makes you predictable." Dominique turned, breathing hard, sweat running down her face. The woman watching her was Asian, maybe 40, with eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone directly into intention. She wore expensive clothes but moved like someone who could kill you 6 different ways before you realized you were in danger. "Sophia Mark," the woman said, extending a hand. "And you're Dominique Winters, the girl from the video." Dominique's jaw tightened. She'd thought by now people would have forgotten, moved on to the next viral humiliation. Apparently not. "Don't look like that," Sophia continued. "I'm not here to mock you. I'm here because I recognize something in you, something most people don't have. Strategic brilliance." Dominique lowered her hands, curious despite herself. "What do you want?" Sophia gestured toward the gym's small cafe area, and they sat at a corner table where no one could overhear. "What do you know about the syndicate, Dominique?" "Nothing," Dominique admitted. "Good. That's how it should be. We're a global organization that operates in the spaces between governments, corporations, and criminal enterprises. We don't break laws. We operate above them. We don't fight with weapons. We fight with information, leverage, and strategic positioning. And we're always looking for people with your particular gift." "What gift?" "The ability to see patterns others miss. To understand power structures instinctively. To turn disadvantage into advantage. I've been watching you for 3 months, Dominique. The way you train, the way you study, the way you've rebuilt yourself from complete devastation. Most people would have stayed broken. You chose to become dangerous." Dominique leaned forward. "What are you offering me?" "A path. The syndicate has ranks. Operative, agent, handler, director, and at the very top, Omega. Only 7 Omegas exist in the world at any given time. They command resources worth billions, armies of operatives, and influence that makes presidents nervous. And what would I have to do?" "Survive. This path is dangerous, Dominique. Many don't make it past operative. Some die. Some break. Some realize they don't have what it takes and walk away. But if you succeed, if you rise through the ranks, you'll be untouchable. Powerful beyond anything Daniel Sterling could ever imagine. You'll be the kind of person who makes men like him bow their heads when you enter a room." Dominique felt something clicking into place inside her chest. This was what she'd been looking for. This was the forge that would complete her transformation. "I'm in," she said. "Whatever it takes." Sophia smiled, and it was the smile of a predator recognizing another predator. "Then welcome to the syndicate, Operative Winters. Your training begins tomorrow. And Dominique, one more thing. Forget about Daniel Sterling. Forget about revenge. Focus on becoming so powerful that he becomes irrelevant. That's the real victory." But as Dominique left the gym that night, she couldn't help the small smile that crossed her face. She wasn't planning revenge. She was planning to become so far above Daniel that looking down at him would require a telescope. Year 1 as an operative nearly killed her. The syndicate didn't ease new recruits into the work. They threw you into the deep end and watched to see if you'd drown or swim. Dominique swam. Her first mission was in Singapore, retrieving compromising documents from a corrupt government official without leaving any trace. She'd planned for 2 weeks, studied the building's security systems, memorized guard rotations, and executed the extraction in under 12 minutes. Perfect. Her second mission was in Prague, convincing a corporate executive to abandon a merger that would have destabilized 3 different markets. She'd done it over coffee, using nothing but conversation and perfectly calibrated psychological pressure. The executive never even realized he'd been manipulated. By year 2, Dominique had been promoted to agent. This meant commanding small teams, coordinating operations across multiple cities, and dealing with increasingly complex scenarios. She excelled. Where other agents struggled with the moral ambiguity of their work, Dominique understood something fundamental. The syndicate wasn't good or evil. It was about maintaining balance, preventing chaos, and ensuring that power didn't concentrate in ways that could destabilize entire regions. Year 3 brought handler status. Now she was managing entire networks of agents and operatives, orchestrating operations that affected millions of people without any of them knowing. The syndicate existed. She'd prevented a war in the Middle East by exposing a weapons dealer who'd been playing both sides. She'd stopped a pandemic before it started by tracing contaminated pharmaceuticals back to their source and shutting down the distribution network. Sophia had been right. Dominique had the gift. She could see patterns in chaos, connections others missed, strategic possibilities that seemed impossible until she explained them. Her success rate was unprecedented. 100% mission completion. 0 casualties on her teams. 0 exposure. Years 4 and 5 as director brought global responsibility. She commanded operations across 6 continents, coordinated with world leaders who never knew they were taking suggestions from the syndicate, and managed resources worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She'd become someone important, someone powerful, someone feared. But the path to Omega required something more, something that only a handful of people had ever achieved. In year 6, the syndicate gave her the impossible mission. A small country in Eastern Europe had descended into dictatorship. The president had become a tyrant, murdering opposition leaders, controlling all media, and preparing to invade 2 neighboring nations. The international community was paralyzed. Military intervention would trigger a wider war. Economic sanctions were meaningless when the dictator controlled all the country's resources. Orchestrate regime change, the Council of Omegas told her. No bloodshed, no international incident, no trace of outside interference. You have 1 year. It took Dominique 11 months. She'd infiltrated the dictator's inner circle through a series of carefully placed operatives. She'd turned his most trusted advisors against him by revealing evidence of his plans to eliminate them once he'd consolidated power. She'd arranged for damning evidence of his corruption to surface simultaneously across all underground media channels. She'd coordinated a peaceful uprising that looked entirely organic but had been orchestrated down to the minute. The dictator had resigned and fled the country. Free elections were held. Democracy was restored, and not a single person died in the transition. It was, as one of the other directors put it, a fucking masterpiece of strategic planning. On a cold morning in December, 7 years after Daniel Sterling had called her ordinary, Dominique stood in an unmarked building in Vienna and took the Omega Oath. She was the 8th person to achieve this rank, the youngest by more than a decade. Sophia Mark, now a fellow Omega, placed the insignia in Dominique's hand, a simple platinum pin shaped like the Greek letter, small, unassuming. But everyone in the world who mattered would know what it meant. "How does it feel?" Sophia asked. Dominique looked at the pin in her palm and remembered the woman who'd run crying from the crystal ballroom. Remembered believing she was ordinary. Worthless. Not enough. "I was never ordinary," Dominique said quietly. "I was asleep, and now I'm awake." Daniel Sterling stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Tech Tower and felt the satisfaction of a man who'd made all the right choices. 8 years of relentless focus had transformed his startup into a tech empire worth $500 million. Partnerships with major corporations, government contracts, investments in emerging markets. He'd become exactly what he'd always known he could be. And in 3 weeks, he'd marry Victoria Ashford in what would undoubtedly be the social event of the season. 500 guests. The Grand Marquis Hotel. Coverage in all the major society publications. It would be perfect. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Did you finalize the guest list? Don't forget to send invitations to everyone important." Daniel scrolled through the list his assistant had prepared. The mayor, 3 senators, CEOs of half the Fortune 500, society figures, old money families. Everyone who mattered would be there to witness his triumph. And then, for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, Daniel added one more name to the list. Dominique Winters. He hadn't thought about her in years. Well, that wasn't entirely true. He'd thought about her occasionally, wondering what had happened to her after that night at the gala. Had she found someone else? Probably someone more her speed. Middle management somewhere. Suburban life. Ordinary existence for an ordinary person. The impulse to invite her was partly nostalgia, partly curiosity, and partly something darker. He wanted her to see what she'd missed out on. Wanted her to understand that his assessment had been correct. She hadn't been good enough for the life he was building. Victoria was perfect, beautiful, connected, ambitious in all the right ways. Everything Dominique hadn't been. "Send a personal invitation to this address," Daniel told his assistant, writing down the last known address he had for Dominique. "Make it extra nice. The premium package." 3,000 miles away, in a secure facility that didn't appear on any maps, Dominique Winters was coordinating operations in 4 different time zones when the notification came through. A package had been delivered to her registered civilian address, the one she maintained for legal purposes but never actually visited. She had it forwarded to her current location and opened it with mild curiosity. Wedding invitation, premium cardstock, elegant calligraphy, Mr. Daniel Sterling and Miss Victoria Ashford request the honor of your presence. For a moment, Dominique felt nothing. Then something cold and sharp settled in her chest. Not anger, not pain, something more dangerous. Calculation. Sophia appeared in the doorway of her office. "That expression on your face means someone just made a very stupid mistake. Want to talk about it?" Dominique handed her the invitation. Sophia read it and started laughing. "Oh, this is Rich. Daniel Sterling. I know that name. His tech company has been floating on loans from organizations we control. He doesn't know it, but his entire empire exists because we've allowed it to." Dominique leaned back in her chair. "And he invited me to his wedding. Are you going to go?" Dominique smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd just been handed an unexpected gift. "Oh yes, I'm going to go. But not for the reasons he thinks." Sophia studied her carefully. "This could be dangerous emotionally. You've moved past him, Dom. You don't need to prove anything." "I'm not going to prove anything," Dominique said quietly. "I'm going to teach a lesson about underestimating people, about discarding others because you think they're beneath you, about the cost of cruelty." Her fingers drummed on the invitation. "Daniel Sterling thinks he's inviting someone he discarded, someone who's been mourning what she lost, someone who'll see his success and feel diminished by comparison. He has no idea who's actually coming to his wedding." Dominique pulled up everything the syndicate had on Daniel Sterling's business operations. It took less than 30 minutes to map his entire empire. Sterling Tech had grown impressively, but the foundation was built on sand, venture capital from firms that were fronts for syndicate investments, government contracts facilitated by connections she'd helped establish, partnership deals that had been smoothed by operatives removing obstacles. Daniel thought he'd built his success through his own brilliance. In reality, he'd been swimming in a current the syndicate had created, never realizing he was being carried along. She could collapse his entire company with 3 phone calls, but that would be too quick, too impersonal. No, this required a different approach. "Sophia," Dominique called, "I need a security detail for the Sterling wedding. 20 operators, best we have. Make them visible." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You want to make an entrance?" "I want to make a statement. Presence is the threat. We're not going to say anything aggressive. We're not going to do anything threatening. We're just going to exist in that space and let Daniel understand exactly what he threw away." "What about the dress?" Dominique smiled. "Custom design. Sapphire. Something that costs more than Daniel spends on Victoria's engagement ring. And jewelry that makes it clear I'm not someone's plus one. I'm someone who matters." Over the next 2 weeks, preparations moved forward with military precision. The dress was designed by an Italian couturier, who usually only worked for royalty, $200,000. Sapphire silk that caught light like liquid midnight. Diamond jewelry borrowed from a private collection worth more than most people's houses. The security detail was selected from operatives who'd worked with Dominique for years, former special forces, intelligence officers, people who moved with the kind of controlled lethality that made civilians instinctively step back. They'd wear tactical suits, earpieces, and carry themselves with the absolute confidence of people who could end threats before they fully formed. The morning of the wedding, Dominique stood in front of the mirror in her Vienna apartment and barely recognized herself. The scared girl who'd run from the crystal ballroom was gone completely. In her place stood an Omega, someone who commanded resources worth billions, someone whose decisions affected millions of lives, someone who made world leaders nervous. Sophia appeared behind her. "You ready for this?" Dominique adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist, a gift from a grateful foreign minister whose country she'd saved from economic collapse. "I'm not going there to humiliate him, Sophia. I'm going there to let him humiliate himself." "How?" "By being exactly who I am now, Daniel invited me, thinking I'd be impressed by his success, thinking I'd feel small next to his achievement. Instead, he's going to discover that his entire world exists because I allow it to. That's not a threat. That's just the truth. The motorcade assembled outside her building. 10 black SUVs, armored, equipped with communication systems that could coordinate with satellites. The kind of vehicles that said government or military or something even more concerning. As Dominique settled into the center vehicle, her lead security officer turned from the front seat. "Ma'am, what's the protocol if anyone gets aggressive?" "De-escalate," Dominique said calmly. "We're not there to threaten anyone. We're there to attend a wedding. Our presence alone will be sufficient." The motorcade pulled out into traffic, and Dominique felt something settle in her chest. Not excitement, not revenge. Just a calm certainty that Daniel Sterling was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. "Tomorrow, Daniel learns what ordinary really looks like," she said quietly. The Grand Marquis Hotel looked like something from a fairy tale. Perfect weather, blue sky with just enough clouds to be interesting, sunlight catching off the crystal chandeliers visible through the massive windows. 500 guests had arrived in their finest clothing, filling the hotel's sculpture garden where the ceremony would take place. Daniel stood near the entrance, greeting arrivals with Victoria at his side. She looked perfect in her wedding dress, designer creation that probably cost as much as a luxury car. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. The mayor had arrived, senators, CEOs. Everyone who mattered was here to witness his triumph. "That's everyone on the list," his assistant said, checking her tablet. "Ceremony starts in 15 minutes. Daniel nodded, satisfied. This was what success looked like. This was validation of every choice he'd made, every person he'd left behind, every sacrifice that had brought him to this moment. Then someone screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear exactly, more like shock, surprise, and it came from the street side of the hotel where late arrivals were still filtering in. Daniel turned and felt his heart stop. A motorcade of black SUVs had pulled up to the entrance. Not the normal luxury vehicles that wealthy wedding guests arrived in. These were something else, armored, serious. The kind of vehicles that carried people who had enemies. The rear doors opened simultaneously, and 20 men emerged. Tactical suits, earpieces, moving with the kind of precision that said military or intelligence or something even more dangerous. They established a perimeter around the center vehicle with practiced efficiency, and wedding guests instinctively stepped back, champagne glasses forgotten. Then the center vehicle's door opened. Dominique Winters stepped out, and the world seemed to pause. Sapphire gown that caught the afternoon light like captured water. Diamond jewelry that even from a distance was clearly worth a fortune. Hair styled perfectly, makeup flawless. But more than the physical appearance, it was the way she carried herself. Absolute confidence, complete authority, the bearing of someone who commanded rather than followed. Daniel felt his mouth go dry. That couldn't be Dominique. That couldn't be the girl who'd run crying from the crystal ballroom. That couldn't be the ordinary woman he'd discarded. But it was. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a wave. Wedding guests, who recognized power when they saw it, who understood that this level of security meant someone important, someone dangerous, someone who mattered. "Is that Dominique Winters?" someone whispered near Daniel. "The one from the video?" "Can't be," another voice responded. "Look at her security detail. Look at how people are reacting. That's someone important." Then someone else, a tech CEO who'd been standing near the entrance, made a sound like all the air had been punched from his lungs. "Oh my God, that's an Omega. That insignia on her collar. That's an Omega." The whispers intensified. Omega. The word spread through the crowd like wildfire. Most people didn't know what it meant. But those who did, those who moved in the circles where real power operated, they knew, and their faces went pale. Dominique walked forward, her security detail moving with her, creating space in the crowd that filled immediately with staring faces and camera phones. She moved with unhurried grace, acknowledging no one, her eyes fixed on a point ahead, and that point was Daniel. "Daniel," Victoria hissed beside him. "Who is that woman, and why does she have a private army?" But Daniel couldn't answer. He couldn't breathe. Because Dominique was walking directly toward him, and with every step, he was beginning to understand that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. The crowd parted before Dominique like water, wedding guests, stepping back to create a path, not out of courtesy, out of instinct. The kind of instinct that recognizes predators and makes space for them to pass. Dominique stopped 3 feet from Daniel, close enough for conversation but maintaining the distance of someone who didn't need to claim space. She already owned it. "Hello, Daniel," she said. Her voice was calm, pleasant, with no trace of anger or pain or anything except polite greeting. "Thank you for the invitation. It was very thoughtful." Daniel tried to speak, but his mouth had forgotten how words worked. He stared at her, at the diamond jewelry, at the security detail that surrounded her like satellites around a planet, at the confidence that radiated from her like heat. "Dominique," he finally managed. What is all this?" "This," Dominique gestured to her security detail with a small smile. "These are my associates. I hope you don't mind. I don't travel without appropriate protection these days." Victoria stepped forward, her face a mask of confusion and growing horror. "Daniel," someone near them whispered urgently. "Daniel, do you know who she is? Do you know what an Omega is?" Daniel turned to the speaker, a venture capitalist named Harrison who'd invested heavily in Sterling Tech. "What are you talking about?" Harrison's face had gone pale. "That insignia she's wearing. That's the syndicate. And that rank means she's one of 7 people worldwide who command." Harrison paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound insane. "Who command everything, Daniel. Everything that matters." Dominique smiled pleasantly. "Mr. Harrison is being dramatic. I simply work in international relations, though I appreciate his recognition." But Harrison wasn't finished. "Daniel," he said urgently, "your investors, where do you think their money comes from? Your government contracts, who do you think facilitates those connections? Your partnership deals." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You've been successful because you've been operating an infrastructure that the syndicate created." Daniel felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. I built Sterling Tech myself. I made those connections." Dominique tilted her head, her expression sympathetic. "You did work very hard, Daniel. I followed your career with interest. Sterling Tech is impressive. The partnerships with Mark Industries, the government contracts in emerging markets, the venture capital from Morrison Group, all very impressive." She paused, let the words settle. "Mark Industries reports to Sophia Mark, who's been my mentor for 7 years. Morrison Group is a syndicate front. And those government contracts were facilitated by connections I helped establish as part of regional stability operations." The silence that followed was absolute. 500 wedding guests holding their breath, witnessing something that would be talked about for years. "You're saying," Daniel's voice shook, "you're saying my company exists because of you?" "Your company exists because the syndicate maintains infrastructure that allows businesses like yours to flourish. You're a very talented entrepreneur, Daniel, but you've been swimming in currents we created." "That's not an insult. Most successful people are. They just don't usually realize it." Victoria grabbed Daniel's arm. "This can't be true. Tell me this isn't true." But Harrison was nodding, his face grave. "It's true. Oh God, Daniel, it's all true. If she wanted to, she could collapse Sterling Tech by tomorrow. One phone call to Morrison Group. One word to Mark Industries. All your contracts would evaporate." Victoria turned to Dominique, her voice rising. "You're threatening us at our own wedding?" "I'm not threatening anyone," Dominique said calmly. "I'm simply attending a wedding I was invited to. But since the subject has come up, Miss Ashford, you should know that my colleague in hospitality operations recently reviewed the Ashford Hotel's operating licenses. Apparently, there were some concerns about compliance with international labor standards. Nothing serious, I'm sure, but these things do require attention." Victoria's face went white. You control my family's business too?" "I don't control anything," Dominique corrected gently. "I simply work in an organization that helps maintain global stability. But yes, most major business operations intersect with our areas of concern at some point." She turned back to Daniel, and her smile was devastating in its kindness. "Congratulations on your wedding, Daniel. I hope you'll both be very happy together. And I hope you've learned something valuable today." "What's that?" Daniel whispered. "Never mistake someone's current circumstances for their potential. You called me ordinary once, but I was never ordinary, Daniel. I was just sleeping. And you were unfortunate enough to be there when I woke up." She turned to leave, her security detail moving with her, and the crowd parted again. But before she'd taken 5 steps, Victoria's voice rang out across the garden. "The wedding is canceled. Everyone can go home." Daniel spun around. Victoria, what are you? I'm not marrying someone who exists at another woman's discretion, Victoria said, pulling off her engagement ring and throwing it at Daniel's feet. I'm not spending my life wondering when she'll decide to destroy everything we've built. Find someone else, Daniel. Someone ordinary. And as Victoria walked away, as 500 wedding guests began to scatter, as Daniel stood alone in his tailored suit surrounded by the wreckage of his perfect day, Dominique Winters climbed back into her vehicle and didn't look back once. Within 48 hours, everything Daniel had built began to collapse. Morrison Group withdrew their investment, citing concerns about market volatility. Mark Industries terminated their partnership, claiming strategic realignment. The government contracts were mysteriously delayed, lost in bureaucratic review that would take indefinite time to resolve. Daniel spent the first week making frantic phone calls, trying to understand what was happening, trying to save his company. But every conversation ended the same way. We're sorry, Mr. Sterling. This decision comes from higher up. There's nothing we can do. His board of directors held an emergency meeting and voted to remove him as CEO. The official reason was mismanagement and failure to secure key partnerships. The real reason, which everyone understood but nobody said, was that Sterling Tech had been built on sand, and Dominique Winters had kicked away the foundation. By week 2, the banks were calling in his personal loans. The penthouse apartment he'd been so proud of was seized. His luxury cars were repossessed. His investment portfolio was liquidated to pay creditors. Everything he'd accumulated over 8 years disappeared like smoke. The video of the wedding disaster went viral, of course. 50 million views in the first week. But this time, Daniel was the one being mocked. Look at his face when he realizes, the man who discarded an Omega. How do you fail this badly? The comments were merciless, and Daniel understood for the first time what he'd put Dominique through 8 years ago. By month 3, Daniel was working as a mid-level project manager at a competitor's firm, not because they valued him, but because they enjoyed having the fallen titans sweeping their floors. His salary was $70,000 a year, a fraction of what he'd been making, barely enough to rent a small apartment in a neighborhood he would have sneered at a year ago. The worst part wasn't the poverty. It was the knowledge, the understanding that his entire life had been a lie, that his success had never been his own, that he'd been propped up by an organization he didn't even know existed, and the moment they'd withdrawn support, he'd discovered he was nothing. Victoria had married someone else within 6 months, a senator's son, someone with old money and family connections that couldn't be destroyed by a single woman, no matter how powerful. Daniel saw the wedding announcement in the society pages and felt nothing. She'd been right to leave him. One night, sitting in his tiny apartment, drinking cheap whiskey and staring at the water-stained ceiling, Daniel typed out a message to Dominique. He'd found her contact information through old connections, though he suspected she'd know he was looking for her. I'm sorry. That was all he wrote. 2 words that couldn't possibly convey the depth of his regret, but they were all he had. He sent it and waited. Days passed. Then weeks. No response came. Daniel checked his message constantly, hoping for acknowledgement, for forgiveness, for some sign that Dominique had received his apology. But silence was the only answer he received. And eventually, Daniel understood that silence was its own response. He'd become so irrelevant that even his apology didn't merit acknowledgement. He no longer existed in Dominique's world. That was the real punishment. Not the loss of money or status or comfort. The punishment was understanding that he'd thrown away something precious, something rare, something that could have made him better. And now he would spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he'd lost. 6 months after the wedding, Dominique sat in her office in Vienna, coordinating operations that would prevent a water crisis in North Africa, resolve a territorial dispute in Southeast Asia, and quietly facilitate peace talks between 2 nations that officially weren't speaking to each other. Her desk displayed feeds from 6 continents, each screen showing operations in progress, each one affecting millions of lives in ways those people would never know. This was what power actually looked like. Not wealth, though she had access to resources worth billions. Not status, though world leaders took her calls immediately. Real power was the ability to change outcomes, to prevent disasters, to create stability in chaos. Real power was being so influential that your existence made the world safer without anyone knowing your name. Sophia appeared in her doorway. You've been featured in the council's annual report, the Omega who rose from nothing. They're calling your trajectory unprecedented." Dominique smiled. "I didn't rise from nothing, Sophia. I rose from sleep. There's a difference." Sophia sat down across from her, studying her carefully. "How do you feel about what happened with Daniel?" Dominique leaned back in her chair, considering. "I feel nothing. Not satisfaction. Not regret. Nothing. He made choices based on what he thought would bring him success. I made choices based on becoming who I needed to be. We both got exactly what we deserved." "He sent you a message, didn't he?" "I saw the notification flag." Dominique nodded. "An apology. 2 words. I didn't respond." "Why not?" "Because responding would suggest he still matters, that his opinion of me, whether positive or negative, still has weight. But he doesn't matter anymore, Sophia. He's just a man who made bad decisions and suffered the consequences. I don't need his apology. I don't need his acknowledgement. I don't need anything from him." A notification appeared on one of Dominique's screens. "Report from surveillance operations. Daniel Sterling's current status. Employed at competitor firm. Salary $70,000 annually. Residence studio apartment. No significant relationships. Social media presence minimal. Reputation destroyed." Dominique glanced at it briefly, then closed the file without comment. Filed away with thousands of other pieces of information that might be relevant someday but weren't worth her attention now. Sophia watched her. "You really don't care anymore, do you?" "I care about the operations on my desk," Dominique replied. "I care about the 3 million people who'll have clean water next year because of the work we're doing. I care about preventing the war that's building in Eastern Europe. I care about maintaining stability in regions where one wrong move could trigger catastrophe. Daniel Sterling? He's not even a footnote in my concerns." She turned to look out her window at the Vienna skyline, at the city where she commanded operations that touched every corner of the globe. "Some people call me extraordinary now, but I was always extraordinary. Daniel just couldn't see it. And that's the difference between people who rise and people who fall. Vision." Sophia stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Dom, I'm proud of who you've become, not because you destroyed Daniel, but because you became someone who makes the world better. That's what real power looks like." After Sophia left, Dominique returned to her work. Operations to coordinate, crises to prevent, lives to save. This was her world now. Not revenge, not validation, not proving anyone wrong. Just the quiet, constant work of making sure the world kept turning. That stability prevailed. That chaos was held at bay. Sometimes, late at night when operations were calm and the world was momentarily stable, Dominique would think about the girl who'd run crying from the crystal ballroom. The girl who'd believed she was ordinary. The girl who'd let one man's cruelty define her worth. That girl was gone now. Not destroyed. Transformed. Like steel refined in fire. Like diamonds formed under pressure. Like every powerful thing that begins as something soft and becomes something unbreakable. Daniel Sterling had thrown away a woman with extraordinary potential because he couldn't see past her current circumstances. He'd discarded something precious because it didn't match his shallow definition of value. And now he would spend the rest of his life knowing that his moment of cruelty had been witnessed by someone who would become more powerful than he'd ever imagined possible. That was justice. Not revenge. Justice. The universe correcting itself. Ensuring that those who threw away diamonds thinking they were stones would spend their lives surrounded by stones, understanding too late what they'd lost. And Dominique Winters, Omega, one of 7 people worldwide who commanded the invisible infrastructure that kept civilization functioning, returned to her work with a small smile on her face. Not because Daniel had fallen, but because she had risen so far that his fall was just a footnote in a much larger story. The story of a woman who learned that some people aren't ordinary. They're just waiting for their moment. And when that moment comes, when they finally wake up and realize their true potential, the world itself shifts to make room for who they've become. If this story hit you, if Dominique's rise reminded you that real power is quiet, earned, and unbreakable, then please subscribe for more stories like this. And don't keep it to yourself. Share this story with your loved ones, with someone who needs to hear that they're not ordinary, they're just waiting for their moment. Your share might be the encouragement that changes someone's life.